Imagine Britain after Rome fell. Chaos, right? Barbarians overrunning everything, civilization collapsing into darkness? Wrong. Dead wrong. In the north, something extraordinary was happening. Celtic kingdoms were rising from the ashes of empire, forging a warrior culture so powerful it would terrify Anglo-Saxon invaders for 2 centuries. These weren't primitive tribes, they were sophisticated political states with professional armies, literate courts, and cultural achievements that would echo through British history forever. Welcome to the story of Hen Ogledd, the Old North, the forgotten kingdoms that shaped Britain. For nearly 4 centuries, Rome had controlled northern Britain with iron discipline, but Roman occupation wasn't simple conquest, it was transformation. The Brigantes, controlling massive territories across Yorkshire and Lancashire, had built hill forts spanning over 700 acres, protected by multiple ramparts that would make modern engineers jealous. Their capital at Aldborough developed from a native settlement into a sophisticated Romano-British town with mosaic floors, underfloor heating, and a forum complex rivaling anything in southern Britain. This wasn't barbarism, this was civilization adapting. But here's what's fascinating: beneath Roman control, Celtic political structures survived intact. Queen Cartimandua ruled the Brigantes in the mid-1st century through a sophisticated system of sub-chiefs governing territories under her authority. Her alliance with Rome wasn't submission, it was pragmatic statecraft. She maintained autonomy while accessing Roman trade networks and military protection. Then civil war erupted between Cartimandua and her husband Venutius, revealing deep factional divisions that would shape northern politics for centuries. Archaeological evidence from Stanwick shows hasty fortifications from this conflict, walls built in panic as political crisis turned violent. North of the Brigantes, the Votadini controlled coastal regions from the Firth of Forth to the River Tweed. Their stronghold at Traprainlaw was something else entirely, a massive hill fort rising 724 feet above sea level, continuously occupied from the Bronze Age through the Roman period and beyond. At its peak, this settlement covered 40 acres with evidence of metalworking, pottery production, and trade connections reaching the Mediterranean. Think about that: Scottish tribes trading with merchants from Rome, North Africa, and the Eastern Empire. The famous Traprainlaw treasure discovered in 1919 tells an incredible story. Over 100 pieces of late Roman silver, much deliberately hacked and folded for melting into ingots. But the Votadini's relationship with Rome was unique. They weren't conquered. They maintained independence while engaging diplomatically and commercially with Roman administration. Roman coins throughout their territory proved sustained contact, but the absence of Roman forts in their core lands reveals something crucial: mutual benefit. Rome secured the Votadini as a buffer against hostile northern tribes without spending military resources. The Novante controlled southwestern regions, modern Dumfries and Galloway, with territory extending across fertile lands between the Solway Firth and Galloway Hills. Their position gave them control over sea routes to Ireland, facilitating connections that would prove critical for spreading Christianity. Meanwhile, the Selgovae occupied the central southern uplands, establishing settlements in river valleys with formidable hill forts like Eildon Hill North, 40 acres containing evidence for over 300 roundhouses. Imagine the population concentration required to sustain that settlement. Then Rome arrived with systematic military force. General Gnaeus Julius Agricola's campaigns from 78–84 AD revealed the methodical Roman approach to subduing northern tribes. The network of forts, temporary camps, and roads created infrastructure that would profoundly influence regional development for centuries. Major fortifications like Inchtuthil in Perthshire could accommodate an entire legion. That's over 5,000 soldiers in one fortress. The scale of Roman ambition in the north was staggering, but then Emperor Hadrian changed everything in 122 AD. Instead of expansion, he chose consolidation. Hadrian's Wall stretched 84 Roman miles from Wallsend to Bowness on Solway, incorporating 16 major forts, 80-mile castles, and 160 turrets. This wasn't just a wall, it was the most heavily fortified frontier in the entire Roman Empire. Construction required an estimated 9,000 soldiers working for 6 years, moving over 1 million tons of stone, creating a barrier standing 15 feet high, with a parapet adding another 6 feet. The engineering achievement alone was breathtaking. The wall's impact extended far beyond military function. Civilian settlements called vici grew around forts, creating new population centers and economic hubs. At housesteads, thriving communities emerged with shops, taverns, temples, and workshops clustered around southern defenses. Merchants, craftsmen, and camp followers created unique Romano-British culture, blending military efficiency with civilian enterprise. 20 years later, the Antonine Wall pushed the frontier 100 miles further north, 39 miles from Bowness to Old Kilpatrick. But this turf and timber wall lasted only 20 years before abandonment around 162 AD, reflecting challenges of maintaining extended supply lines with limited manpower. Roman presence fundamentally altered northern Britain's political landscape. Major fortress towns like York, Chester, and Carlisle created new power centres, drawing tribal elites into Roman administrative systems. Smaller market towns like Corbridge grew from military supply depots into major commercial centres, providing trade opportunities transcending traditional tribal boundaries. But here's the genius. Roman civil administration operated through a combination of direct rule and client relationships with cooperative tribes. The civitas system granted limited self-governance to tribal territories under Roman oversight, allowing indigenous political structures to survive in modified forms. The civitas of the Brigantes, centered at Aldborough, maintained traditional territorial boundaries while adopting Roman administrative practices. Archaeological evidence reveals gradual adoption of Roman material culture throughout the region. Villa complexes at Beedlam and Well in North Yorkshire show how Romano-British elites embraced Roman architectural styles. Sophisticated heating systems, painted wall plasters, mosaic floors, and bathhouses rivaling contemporary examples from Gaul and the Rhineland. The Roman road network created lasting changes to settlement patterns and economic relationships. Major routes like Dare Street running from York to the Antonine Wall facilitated not only military movement but commercial traffic, connecting previously isolated communities. Milestones, mansionies, and smaller settlements grew along these routes, creating new focal points for regional development. Roman coinage revolutionized economic relationships. Coin hoards demonstrate penetration of monetary exchange into areas previously relying on barter. Locally produced pottery imitating Roman forms alongside imported Samian ware from Gaul and amphorae from the Mediterranean reveals integration into empire-wide trade networks. Christianity's arrival occurred gradually during the late Roman period through multiple transmission routes. Christian symbols on artifacts from Vindolanda and early Christian burials at sites across Britain indicate the new religion had established itself among military and civilian populations by the 3rd century AD. Constantine's conversion in 312 AD accelerated this process. Official imperial support facilitated church construction and bishop appointments to major urban centres. Archaeological evidence from Wythorn in Galloway suggests Christianity established particularly strong roots in southwestern tribal territories. Tradition associates St. Ninian with establishing a church at Wythorn in the late 4th or early 5th century. While not conclusively proven archaeologically, carved stones bearing Christian symbols and Latin inscriptions from this period demonstrate literate Christian communities capable of sophisticated theological and artistic expression. But then Rome began withdrawing. Gradual withdrawal of military forces began in the late 4th century as imperial resources were redirected to defend against barbarian incursions along Rhine and Danube frontiers. The usurpation of Magnus Maximus in 383 AD, who withdrew significant troops from Britain for continental campaigns, marked the beginning of a process culminating in complete abandonment of Roman administration by the early 5th century. The collapse of Roman civil government created a power vacuum that existing Romano-British elites struggled to fill. Archaeological evidence from Burdeswald on Hadrian's Wall reveals transformation of Roman military installations into civilian settlements, timber halls built within former barracks blocks, evidence for continued occupation well into the 5th century. These adaptations suggest local communities attempted to maintain organized authority absent imperial administration. The survival of Romano-British culture into the post-Roman period is evidenced by continued urban life at centres like Carlisle, where excavations reveal sustained occupation and maintenance of Roman-style buildings into the 6th century. The presence of imported pottery and luxury goods indicates trade networks, while reduced, continued functioning after formal end of Roman rule. But here's where it gets really interesting. The transformation of tribal territories into the kingdoms of the Old North built upon foundations established during the Roman period. Administrative boundaries of the civitates, road networks connecting major settlements, and political relationships forged between Roman authorities and tribal elites all contributed to the emerging post-Roman political landscape. The archaeological record demonstrates remarkable continuity in settlement patterns, many sites showing unbroken occupation from late Roman through early medieval periods, suggesting transition from Roman to native rule was often gradual rather than catastrophic. This wasn't collapse, it was adaptation. The figure of Hen, Cole the Old, emerges from this transitional period as a pivotal character in establishing post-Roman political authority. Historical analysis suggests Cole may have been a Romano-British official who successfully maintained control over former imperial territories in the late 4th or early 5th century. Genealogical traditions preserved in medieval Welsh manuscripts trace descent of multiple northern royal houses from this foundational figure. Archaeological investigations at sites traditionally associated with Cole's descendants reveal substantial modifications to existing Roman infrastructure during this period. At Caerstopitum, near Hadrian's Wall, excavations uncovered large timber halls constructed within ruins of Roman buildings, new centers of authority deliberately incorporating symbols of imperial power. These halls, measuring up to 30 meters in length, featured raised platforms for high-status seating and central hearths accommodating substantial retinues, indicating emergence of warrior aristocracies. The Kingdom of Rheged emerged as the most powerful northern British polity, controlling territories from the Solway Firth across the Lake District into the Yorkshire Dales. The royal centre at Carlisle, known in Brittonic as Caer Luel, maintained many characteristics of Roman urban organisation while adapting to new political requirements. Excavations in the cathedral precinct revealed substantial timber buildings constructed over Roman foundations with evidence for metalworking, fine pottery production, and continued use of Roman-style underfloor heating systems well into the 6th century. And this wasn't regression to barbarism, it was sophisticated cultural synthesis. Rheged's political structure combined elements of Roman administrative practice with traditional Celtic kingship. Inscribed stones from the region demonstrate survival of Latin literacy among ruling elites while incorporating distinctly British artistic motifs. The use of Latin titles alongside Brittonic personal names suggests deliberate attempts to maintain continuity with Roman governmental traditions while asserting native political authority. The kingdom's military organization reflected this synthesis. Archaeological evidence from hill forts like Trusties Hill reveals construction of new defensive works during the 5th century, with stone ramparts incorporating Roman masonry techniques. but following traditional Celtic fortress designs. Strathclyde, centred on the fortress of Ogledd at Dumbarton Rock, controlled approaches to the Clyde Valley and maintained important maritime connections with Ireland and the Atlantic regions. The strategic position of Dumbarton Rock, rising 240 feet above the River Clyde, provided a virtually impregnable fortress commanding both river and overland routes into the Scottish Highlands. Archaeological investigations reveal continuous occupation from the Iron Age through the early medieval period, with substantial timber buildings and sophisticated water management systems supporting considerable populations. Strathclyde's rulers maintained particularly strong connections with Irish Gaelic culture. Ogham inscriptions found in the region demonstrate familiarity with Irish writing systems, while archaeological evidence reveals Irish-style metalwork and pottery forms suggesting sustained cultural exchange across the North Channel. The political organisation of Strathclyde incorporated elements derived from Irish tuath systems. The kingdom was divided into territorial units governed by subordinate nobles owing military service to the paramount king at Ogledd. This decentralised structure allowed effective control over extensive territories while maintaining flexibility to respond to external threats. The Kingdom of Elmet occupied strategic territory between the Pennines and North York moors, controlling important river valleys and mountain passes, connecting northern regions with emerging Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to the south and east. The royal centre at Barwick in Elmet featured substantial earthwork defences incorporating both Roman engineering techniques and traditional British hill fort design principles. Archaeological evidence reveals a kingdom maintaining particularly strong continuity with Romano-British traditions. Excavations at Aberford uncovered continued production of Romano-British pottery styles well into the 6th century. The territories of the Gododdin, centred on the fortress of Din Aidin at Edinburgh, controlled eastern approaches to the Scottish lowlands and maintained important connections with both Pictish and Anglo-Saxon neighbours. The volcanic plug of Edinburgh Castle Rock, rising 435 feet above surrounding landscape, provided naturally defensible position, fortified since the Bronze Age. Archaeological investigations revealed substantial timber buildings constructed during the 5th and 6th centuries with sophisticated drainage systems and metalworking evidence suggesting presence of substantial royal courts. The political organisation of Gododdin territories was based on confederation of related kindreds, each controlling discrete territorial units but acknowledging paramount authority of the king at Din Aidin. This system, reflected in genealogical traditions preserved in medieval Welsh sources, allowed considerable local autonomy while maintaining unified military command when external threats required coordinated responses. The military culture of the Gododdin, as preserved in the early medieval poem Y Gododdin attributed to the bard Aneirin, reveals a warrior society emphasizing personal valor, loyalty to kinship groups, and importance of heroic reputation. The emergence of these kingdoms occurred within broader context of population movements and territorial reorganization affecting the entire region. Establishment of Irish Gaelic settlements in western Scotland, traditionally associated with migration of the Scots from Dalriata in Northern Ireland, created new political dynamics requiring British kingdoms to develop sophisticated diplomatic and military responses. Archaeological evidence from Dunad in Argyll reveals establishment of substantial Irish settlements during the 5th century with hill fort construction, production of distinctive Irish-style artefacts, and maintenance of close cultural connections with Ireland. The consolidation of political power across northern British kingdoms during the 6th century rested fundamentally upon military capabilities of professional warrior bands representing synthesis of Roman military traditions and indigenous Celtic practices. These warrior elites, known in contemporary Welsh sources as the Teulu, formed the backbone of royal authority and territorial control throughout Hen Ogledd. Archaeological evidence from major settlement sites reveals emergence of sophisticated military culture combining advanced metallurgical techniques with traditional concepts of personal honor and kinship loyalty. The comitatus system that developed drew heavily upon both Roman military organization and Germanic warrior band structures observed during centuries of frontier contact. At its core, this system centered upon personal relationships between kings or lords and sworn warriors who received weapons, armor, sustenance, and treasure in exchange for military service and absolute loyalty. Excavations at royal centers like Carlisle and Dumbarton Rock uncovered substantial hall complexes specifically designed to accommodate these warrior retinues, with raised platforms for high-status seating and central hearth areas capable of hosting elaborate feasting ceremonies reinforcing social bonds. The tolu represented professional military corps of each kingdom's armed forces, typically numbering between 100 and 300 warriors depending upon realm size and resources. These men were distinguished from ordinary militia levies by full-time military status, superior equipment, and intensive training in weapons handling and tactical formations. Archaeological evidence from weapon hoards discovered at sites like Traprain Law reveals sophisticated metallurgical techniques employed in producing arms and armor, equipping these elite warriors. The primary weapon of the northern British warrior was the long sword, typically measuring 75-85 centimeters in length, with broad, double-edged blade capable of both cutting and thrusting attacks. Metallurgical analysis of surviving examples reveals use of pattern welding techniques, creating blades of exceptional strength and flexibility through careful manipulation of iron and steel components. The hilts featured elaborate guards and pommels decorated with intricate knotwork patterns and inlaid precious metals, proclaiming owners' status and wealth. Spears served as both primary weapons and symbols of authority throughout warrior culture. Archaeological examples range from light javelins designed for throwing to heavy thrusting spears exceeding 2 meters in length. The spearheads display remarkable craftsmanship, with leaf-shaped blades featuring pronounced ridges providing both structural strength and improved penetration capabilities. Many examples bear runic inscriptions or Celtic artistic motifs, suggesting these weapons possessed ceremonial as well as practical significance. The shield remained the warrior's primary defensive equipment, typically constructed from lime or poplar wood planks, covered with leather and reinforced with iron rim binding. Archaeological reconstruction based on metal fittings recovered from burial sites indicates shields measuring approximately 60 centimeters in diameter, with central iron bosses serving as offensive weapons in close combat. Body armor consisted primarily of mail shirts constructed from thousands of interlocking iron rings, production requiring exceptional metallurgical skill and substantial resource investment, making it available only to wealthiest warriors. The ascension of Urien to the throne of Rheged around 550 AD marked the beginning of what would become the most celebrated period in northern British kingdom's history. Urien's reign, lasting approximately 4 decades until his death around 590 AD, represented the pinnacle of Hen Ogledd military and cultural achievement. During this time, Rheged emerged as the dominant power capable of coordinating resistance against Anglo-Saxon expansion while fostering court culture that would preserve memory of British heroism for centuries. Archaeological evidence from Carlisle reveals substantial modifications to the royal complex during mid-6th century, with construction of impressive timber hall measuring over 40 meters in length and 12 meters in width. The building's sophisticated post and beam construction incorporated Roman masonry techniques while following traditional Celtic architectural principles, creating structure capable of accommodating expanded royal household and warrior retinue, reflecting Rheged's growing power. Excavations uncovered evidence for elaborate metalwork facilities within royal precinct, including specialized forges capable of producing high-quality weapons and decorative metalwork. Urien's military campaigns against expanding Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Northumbria represented the most sustained and successful British resistance to Germanic settlement in the post-Roman period. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and contemporary Northumbrian sources, though naturally biased against British achievements, nevertheless acknowledge effectiveness of Urien's military leadership and substantial territorial losses inflicted upon emerging English kingdoms. Archaeological evidence from sites along traditional boundaries between British and Anglo-Saxon territories reveals construction of new defensive works during this period. The most significant of Urien's military victories occurred on the island of Anglesey, known in Welsh as Mon, where a coalition of northern British forces under his leadership decisively defeated an Anglo-Saxon army attempting to establish permanent foothold in North Wales. Contemporary Welsh poetry describes this battle as crushing defeat for the Angles, with substantial numbers of enemy warriors killed and their leadership structure effectively destroyed. Archaeological investigations on Anglesey uncovered evidence for major military engagement during this period, including weapon fragments, human remains showing signs of violent death, and hasty burial of substantial quantities of military equipment. The strategic importance of the Anglesey campaign extended far beyond immediate military results. The Anglo-Saxon attempt to establish control over this fertile island represented coordinated effort to outflank British kingdoms by securing base from which to threaten their western territories and disrupt connections with Irish allies. Urien's successful intervention demonstrated continued capability of British kingdoms to project military power across substantial distances and coordinate complex amphibious operations requiring sophisticated logistical planning and naval resources. Following the Anglesey victory, Urien's forces launched a series of campaigns against Anglo-Saxon settlements in Yorkshire region, systematically reducing fortified positions and reclaiming territories lost to Germanic settlers during previous decades. Archaeological record from sites like Catterick reveals evidence for destruction of Anglo-Saxon defensive works during this period, with layers of burning and deliberate demolition suggesting coordinated military operations rather than random raiding. The recovery of British control over these strategic locations effectively halted Anglo-Saxon expansion westward. The siege of Lindisfarne represents perhaps the most audacious of Urien's military enterprises, demonstrating extent to which British forces had regained initiative against Anglo-Saxon opponents. Contemporary sources describe prolonged blockade of the tidal island serving as important Anglo-Saxon stronghold, with British forces maintaining positions for several months while systematically reducing defenders' capacity for resistance. The logistical requirements for sustaining such extended siege operation reveal sophisticated organizational capabilities that Urien's military system had developed. The court culture that flourished under Urien's patronage represented pinnacle of early Welsh literary and artistic achievement, establishing traditions that would influence Celtic culture for centuries. The royal court at Carlisle became centre of learning and artistic production, attracting scholars, poets and craftsmen from throughout Celtic world. Archaeological evidence reveals presence of substantial libraries and scriptoria within royal complex, with discovery of writing materials, illuminated manuscript fragments and sophisticated book production equipment demonstrating high level of literacy and intellectual activity. The bard Taliesin emerged as most celebrated poet of Urien's court, producing substantial corpus of praise poetry that not only commemorated the king's military achievements, but also established literary conventions defining Welsh heroic poetry for generations. Taliesin's poems, preserved in medieval manuscripts but clearly reflecting authentic 6th century traditions, provide detailed descriptions of Urien's military campaigns, his personal characteristics and cultural values defining his reign. The sophistication of these compositions with complex metrical structures and elaborate metaphorical language reveals existence of highly developed bardic tradition, combining oral performance techniques with written literary practices. But then catastrophe struck. and the gathering of warriors that would culminate in disaster at Catraeth began as carefully planned military expedition designed to strike decisive blow against Northumbrian expansion into traditional British territories. Contemporary sources suggest initiative for this campaign came from Mynydog Mwynfor, king of the Gododdin, who recognized that growing power of Northumbrian kingdom under Ethelfrith posed existential threat to all northern British realms. The strategic objective was capture or destruction of Anglo-Saxon stronghold at Catraeth, modern Catterick in North Yorkshire, controlling crucial river crossings and road networks. Archaeological evidence from Dinidin reveals substantial preparations for major military expedition during late 6th century, including construction of additional storage facilities and evidence for accumulation of large quantities of weapons and supplies. The scale of these preparations suggests operation involving several hundred warriors, far exceeding normal size of Gododdin military forces and indicating participation of allied contingents from other northern British kingdoms. The discovery of distinctive artifacts and weapon styles from various regions confirms multi-kingdom nature of this expedition. The recruitment process drew upon complex web of kinship relationships and political obligations connecting noble houses of Hen Ogledd. Y. Gododdin describes warriors arriving at Dinidin from throughout northern British territories, including representatives from Rheged, Strathclyde, Elmet, and various smaller kingdoms. But these men came not as mercenaries, but as kinsmen and allies, fulfilling obligations established through generations of intermarriage and mutual support, creating force representing the flower of northern British military culture. The year-long period of preparation and feasting preceding the expedition served multiple purposes beyond simple military planning. Extended residence of allied warriors at Dinidin created opportunities for establishing personal relationships, coordinating tactical procedures, and reinforcing cultural bonds essential for maintaining unit cohesion during combat. Archaeological evidence suggests royal court was substantially expanded during this period, with temporary accommodation constructed to house visiting warriors and their retinues. The Battle of Catraeth itself appears to have resulted from failure of original strategic plan, possibly due to unexpected presence of substantial Northumbrian reinforcements or discovery of British approach by enemy scouts. Instead of achieving surprise attack that had been planned, the Gododdin force found itself engaged in major pitched battle against superior numbers of Anglo-Saxon warriors, fighting on familiar terrain with advantage of prepared positions. Archaeological evidence from Catterick area reveals signs of significant military engagement during this period, including weapon fragments and human remains suggesting intense combat. The scale of defeat at Catraeth represented catastrophic loss for northern British kingdoms, which Gododdin claims only a handful of warriors survived from original expedition. While poetic exaggeration may have inflated casualty figures, archaeological evidence and subsequent political developments confirm battle resulted in devastating losses among military elite of Hen Ogledd. The death of so many experienced warriors and noble leaders created power vacuums throughout northern kingdoms, proving impossible to fill effectively. This wasn't just a battle, it was the beginning of the end. The immediate consequences of the Catraeth disaster extended far beyond simple loss of military personnel to encompass fundamental changes in political balance of power throughout northern Britain. The destruction of Allied expedition eliminated most effective military force. British kingdoms had assembled since Urien's campaigns, removing primary obstacle to continued Northumbrian expansion. Archaeological evidence from British settlements in border regions reveals signs of abandonment and destruction during early 7th century, suggesting rapid territorial losses following battle. The psychological impact proved equally significant. The destruction of such prestigious force called into question military capabilities and political leadership of northern British kingdoms. The cultural significance is reflected in composition of Y. Gododdin itself, which transformed military catastrophe into literary achievement while preserving memory of fallen warriors for future generations. The poem's emphasis on honor, loyalty, and heroic death in face of overwhelming odds created cultural framework for understanding defeat that would influence Celtic literature for centuries. Aethelfrith's ascension to Northumbrian throne around 593 AD brought to power a ruler whose military capabilities and territorial ambitions would fundamentally reshape political landscape of northern Britain. Contemporary sources describe him as warrior king whose strategic vision encompassed not merely defensive consolidation but aggressive expansion that would establish Northumbrian hegemony over vast territories previously controlled by British kingdoms. Archaeological evidence from Bamburgh, the coastal fortress serving as Aethelfrith's primary stronghold, reveals substantial modifications during his reign. The conquest of Elmet represented perhaps most significant of Aethelfrith's early territorial acquisitions, as this kingdom controlled crucial river valleys and mountain passes, connecting northern British territories with potential allies in Wales. The royal centre at Barwick in Elmet fell to Northumbrian forces around 617 AD, following systematic campaign that isolated kingdom from external support. Excavations revealed evidence for violent destruction of British defensive works with burned timber and collapsed stone structures, indicating thoroughness of Anglo-Saxon assault. Archaeological evidence from settlements throughout region reveals rapid replacement of British material culture with Anglo-Saxon artifacts, suggesting not merely political conquest but substantial demographic change involving settlement of Germanic populations in formerly British territories. Discovery of Anglo-Saxon burial sites within traditional British settlement areas indicates establishment of permanent colonial communities, preventing any future restoration of British control. This was ethnic replacement on massive scale. Edwin's succession to Northumbrian throne in 616 AD, following Aethelfrith's death, brought to power ruler whose political vision encompassed transformation of Northumbria from regional kingdom into dominant power throughout northern Britain. Edwin's early experiences as exile in various Celtic courts had provided him with detailed knowledge of British political systems and military capabilities, information proving crucial in planning campaigns, completing conquest of remaining independent territories. The siege and eventual capture of Din Idin around 638 AD represented culmination of Edwin's systematic campaign to eliminate last major centre of British resistance in southeastern Scottish lowlands. The fortress that had served as stronghold of Gododdin kingdom for centuries presented formidable defensive challenges with its position atop volcanic plug, providing natural protection enhanced by generations of fortification work. Archaeological evidence reveals massive scale of defensive works protecting summit, including multiple lines of stone walls and sophisticated water storage systems sustaining substantial garrison during extended sieges. The tactical approach Edwin's forces employed demonstrated advanced siege techniques Northumbrian military engineers had developed through decades of warfare against fortified British positions. Contemporary sources described construction of elaborate siege works surrounding fortress and preventing delivery of supplies or reinforcements to defenders. Archaeological investigations uncovered evidence for substantial earthwork constructions in areas surrounding Castle Rock, including defensive ditches and ramparts suggesting establishment of permanent siege camps maintaining blockade for extended periods. The fall of Din Idin eliminated last major British stronghold capable of coordinating resistance to Northumbrian expansion in southeastern regions of what would become Scotland. Strategic importance of fortress's position controlling primary overland routes between Scottish Highlands and English territories made its capture essential for consolidation of Northumbrian control over entire region. Archaeological evidence from settlements throughout former Gododdin territories reveals rapid establishment of Anglo-Saxon administrative systems and settlement of Germanic populations in key strategic locations. The dream of independent British kingdoms was dying, but one kingdom refused to fall. The kingdom of Ogledd, known to later generations as Strathclyde, emerged as most resilient and enduring of all Hen Ogledd realms. Perched atop volcanic plug of Dumbarton Rock, where River Leven meets the Clyde, this fortress kingdom would demonstrate remarkable capacity for adaptation and survival, seeing it outlast all its contemporaries by several centuries. The strategic advantages enabling Ogledd's longevity stemmed from both geographical and political factors, distinguishing it from fallen neighbours. The fortress itself, rising 240 feet above river confluence, presented attackers with virtually insurmountable defensive challenges. Archaeological investigations conducted on rock revealed sophisticated nature of defensive systems protecting royal stronghold. Multiple defensive walls following natural contours of volcanic formation, creating successive defensive zones that could be held independently if outer positions were compromised. Recent excavations uncovered evidence for elaborate water collection and storage systems carved directly into rock, including cisterns capable of holding thousands of gallons, sustaining garrison through extended sieges. The rulers of Ogledd demonstrated exceptional diplomatic skills in navigating complex political relationships emerging following collapse of traditional British power structures. Rather than pursuing futile military resistance against overwhelming Northumbrian superiority, they developed flexible approach combining strategic accommodation with careful maintenance of essential independence. Contemporary sources suggest kingdom occasionally provided tribute or military assistance to Northumbrian overlords when circumstances demanded, while simultaneously maintaining relationships with Pictish, Irish, and surviving British rulers, preserving options for future political realignments. Then came the Vikings. The arrival of Viking longships along coasts of northern Britain during late 8th century introduced new and devastating variable into already complex political landscape. These Norse raiders, emerging from fjords of Norway and islands of Denmark, possessed maritime capabilities and military technologies that would fundamentally alter strategic calculations of rulers throughout region. The first recorded Viking attack on monastery at Lindisfarne in 793 AD sent shockwaves through Christian communities, demonstrating vulnerability of coastal settlements to seaborne assaults. Archaeological evidence from coastal sites throughout Scotland and northern England reveals sudden appearance of Scandinavian material culture during early 9th century, including distinctive brooches, weapons and pottery, indicating not merely raiding activity but establishment of permanent settlements. Discovery of ship burials at sites like Skar in Orkney and presence of Norse-style buildings at locations such as Jarlshof in Shetland demonstrates scale of Scandinavian colonization accompanying initial raiding phase. The Kingdom of Ogledd faced its greatest existential crisis in 870 AD, when massive Viking fleet commanded by Norse leaders Olaf and Ivar sailed up River Clyde and laid siege to fortress of Dumbarton Rock. Contemporary sources describe this as one of most formidable military operations of Viking age, involving fleet of over 200 ships and several thousand warriors drawn from Norse settlements throughout Ireland and Scottish Islands. The siege lasted 4 months, during which attackers employed sophisticated engineering techniques to overcome natural defences protecting fortress for centuries. The Viking assault on Ogledd represented departure from typical Norse raiding tactics, generally favouring rapid strikes against poorly defended targets followed by immediate withdrawal. Decision to commit substantial resources to prolonged siege operation against one of strongest fortifications in northern Britain reflected strategic importance Norse commanders placed on controlling Clyde Valley and its approaches to western Scottish Highlands. Archaeological evidence from siege period reveals construction of substantial earthwork fortifications around base of Dumbarton Rock, indicating Vikings' intention to maintain position regardless of time required. The eventual fall of Dumbarton Rock occurred not through direct assault but through systematic degradation of defenders' capacity to maintain resistance. Vikings' control of surrounding territory prevented delivery of supplies or reinforcements, while their naval supremacy eliminated any possibility of relief from seaborne allies. Archaeological evidence suggests fortresses' water supply, normally adequate for garrison, became insufficient to support expanded population of refugees seeking protection within walls. Discovery of human remains showing signs of malnutrition and disease indicates desperate conditions prevailing during final stages. The capture of Ogledd marked watershed moment in history of northern British kingdoms. Fall of this supposedly impregnable fortress demonstrated no traditional defensive position could guarantee security against Viking assault. Systematic destruction of fortresses' defensive works and enslavement of its population sent clear message about consequences of resistance. Contemporary sources report Vikings departed with over 200 ships loaded with captives destined for slave markets of Dublin, one of largest forced population transfers of early medieval period. But here's what's remarkable: Strathclyde survived. The survival of Strathclyde Kingdom following catastrophic defeat required fundamental adaptations to new military and political realities created by Viking expansion. Royal court, deprived of traditional stronghold, was forced to establish new centres of authority at more defensible locations while developing strategies for coexistence with Norse settlers established throughout Western Islands and coastal regions. Archaeological evidence suggests kingdom's administrative centre relocated to Gododdin, where substantial ecclesiastical and secular buildings were constructed during late 9th century. The reconstruction of Strathclyde political authority involved careful cultivation of relationships with multiple competing powers, including various Viking factions, expanding Scottish Kingdom of Alba, and surviving British territories in Wales. King Run, who assumed leadership following Artgal's death during siege, demonstrated remarkable diplomatic flexibility navigating these complex relationships while gradually rebuilding kingdom's military capabilities. Contemporary sources suggest Strathclyde occasionally provided military assistance to Viking expeditions against common enemies, while simultaneously maintaining connections with other Celtic rulers opposing Norse expansion. The integration of Viking military techniques and technologies into Strathclyde's defensive systems represented crucial adaptation enabling kingdom survival. Archaeological evidence from fortification sites reveals adoption of Scandinavian construction methods alongside traditional British defensive techniques, creating hybrid systems combining best features of both traditions. Presence of Norse-style weapons and equipment at British sites indicates either direct adoption of Viking military technology or employment of Scandinavian mercenaries within British military forces. The cultural synthesis emerging from interaction between British and Viking populations in Strathclyde created new artistic and literary traditions combining elements from both cultures. Archaeological evidence reveals presence of distinctive sculptural styles incorporating Scandinavian artistic motifs with traditional Celtic designs, while manuscript evidence suggests development of new literary forms drawing upon both Norse and British narrative traditions. The famous Gododdin stones carved during this period demonstrate sophisticated artistic achievements resulting from this cultural fusion. And the gradual absorption of Strathclyde into expanding Scottish kingdom during early 11th century marked end of last independent British realm in northern Scotland. Yet this political transformation occurred through negotiated succession rather than military conquest. When King Malcolm III of Scotland inherited Strathclyde through marriage connections around 1034 AD, integration process preserved many existing administrative structures while incorporating kingdom's territories into broader Scottish governmental system. The preservation and transformation of Hen Ogledd cultural memory in medieval Welsh literature represented perhaps most significant legacy of northern British kingdoms. Welsh scholars and poets maintained detailed knowledge of northern traditions long after political collapse of original realms. Scribes working in Welsh monasteries during 12th and 13th centuries possessed access to oral traditions and written sources preserving authentic historical information about northern kingdoms, though material was inevitably filtered through cultural perspectives and political concerns of medieval Welsh society. The manuscripts produced during this period, including the Black Book of Carmarthen and Red Book of Rheged, contain substantial collections of poetry and prose celebrating achievements of northern British heroes while adapting their stories to serve contemporary Welsh cultural and political needs. The figure of Arthur emerged as central organising principle for Welsh memories of northern British resistance to Anglo-Saxon expansion. Though historical connections between legendary king and actual rulers of Hen Ogledd remain complex and contested, archaeological evidence provides no direct confirmation for Arthur's historical existence. Yet geographical settings and cultural context described in early Arthurian literature correspond closely to political landscape of 6th century northern Britain. Association of Arthur with specific locations throughout former territories of Rheged and Gododdin suggests Welsh traditions preserved genuine historical memories of military leadership and political organisation in northern kingdoms, even if memories became attached to legendary figure whose actual existence cannot be verified through contemporary sources. Linguistic legacy of northern British kingdoms persisted in place name evidence preserving Cumbric and early Welsh terminology throughout southern Scotland and northern England long after disappearance of native speakers. Survival of British place names in areas under Anglo-Saxon political control for centuries demonstrates persistence of indigenous geographical knowledge and local cultural traditions despite demographic and political changes. Archaeological investigations guided by place name evidence have successfully identified numerous sites associated with northern British kingdoms. The ecclesiastical traditions developing from Christian communities of Hen Ogledd continued influencing religious practice throughout medieval Celtic world, particularly through veneration of saints associated with northern British kingdoms. St. Kentigern of Strathclyde became patron saint of Glasgow, with his cult centre at Govan serving as focus for regional religious identity transcending political boundaries. Archaeological investigations at early Christian sites throughout former territories reveal continuity in religious practice and architectural traditions, preserving elements of Celtic Christianity despite introduction of continental European religious reforms. The material culture associated with northern British kingdoms influenced artistic and craft traditions throughout medieval Celtic world, particularly in production of metalwork, stone sculpture, and manuscript illumination. Distinctive artistic styles developing in Hen Ogledd during 6th and 7th centuries continued influencing Celtic artistic production for centuries after political collapse of original kingdoms. Archaeological analysis of medieval metalwork from Wales, Ireland, and Scotland reveals persistence of decorative motifs and technical approaches traceable back to workshops in Rheged, Strathclyde, and other northern British centres. The military traditions associated with warrior culture of Hen Ogledd influenced medieval Celtic concepts of nobility and martial honour, shaping aristocratic behaviour throughout region for centuries. Emphasis on personal valour, loyalty to kinship groups, and pursuit of honourable reputation characterising warrior bands of Rheged and Strathclyde continued defining aristocratic ideals in medieval Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. Archaeological evidence from medieval castle sites and noble residences reveals persistence of ceremonial practices and material culture associated with warrior identity. The agricultural and economic systems supporting northern British kingdoms provided models for rural organisation and resource management influencing medieval development throughout northern Britain. Field systems and settlement patterns established during period of British political independence continued shaping land use and agricultural practice long after territories had been incorporated into Anglo-Saxon or Scottish kingdoms. Archaeological surveys of rural landscapes throughout region reveal remarkable continuity in farming techniques and settlement organization, preserving efficient adaptations to local environmental conditions. So the technological innovations developed in northern British kingdoms, particularly in metallurgy and fortification engineering, contributed to broader medieval technological development throughout Celtic world. Advanced ironworking techniques employed in royal workshops at Carlisle and Dumbarton Rock influenced metalworking traditions throughout northern Britain, while sophisticated defensive systems developed for hill fort fortification provided models for medieval castle construction. Archaeological analysis of medieval fortifications reveals incorporation of design principles and construction techniques traceable back to engineering traditions of Hen Ogledd. Modern archaeological and historical research has fundamentally transformed scholarly understanding of northern British kingdoms and their significance in early medieval European history. Systematic excavation of major sites like Dumbarton Rock, Traprain Law, and Carlisle revealed sophisticated political organization and material culture characterizing these realms, challenging earlier assumptions about decline of British civilization following end of Roman rule. Application of scientific dating techniques and environmental archaeology provided precise chronological frameworks and detailed reconstructions of economic and social systems, demonstrating complexity and achievement of northern British society. Interdisciplinary approaches characterizing contemporary scholarship on Hen Ogledd combine archaeological evidence with linguistic analysis, historical documentation, and scientific investigation to create comprehensive pictures of early medieval northern British society. Collaboration between archaeologists, historians, linguists, and environmental scientists produced new insights into political organization, economic systems, religious practice, and cultural identity impossible to achieve through any single methodological approach. Development of digital databases and geographic information systems enabled researchers to analyze spatial relationships and temporal changes across entire region of northern British kingdoms. International context of research on northern British kingdoms revealed their significance within broader patterns of post-Roman political development throughout Western Europe. Comparative studies with contemporary kingdoms in Ireland, Wales, Brittany, and continental Europe demonstrated that Hen Ogledd participated in cultural and political developments extending far beyond immediate British Isles. Archaeological evidence for long-distance trade connections and diplomatic relationships shows northern British kingdoms were integrated into Europe-wide networks of exchange and communication, connecting them with political and cultural development throughout former Roman Empire. The legacy of Hen Ogledd in shaping cultural and political landscape of medieval Britain extends far beyond preservation of romantic memories to encompass fundamental contributions to development of Scottish, Welsh, and English national identities. Territorial boundaries, administrative systems, and cultural traditions established by northern British kingdoms influenced political development throughout region for centuries after their political independence ended. Synthesis of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon traditions occurring in borderlands between British and Germanic territories created hybrid cultures contributing to distinctive characteristics of medieval Northern English and Southern Scottish society. The scholarly recognition of Hen Ogledd's historical significance encouraged new research initiatives and public engagement programs seeking to preserve and interpret archaeological and cultural heritage associated with northern British kingdoms. Museums throughout Scotland, northern England, and Wales developed exhibitions and educational programs presenting current understanding of these societies to public audiences, while heritage organisations work to protect important archaeological sites from development pressures and environmental degradation. The The growing popular interest in early medieval Celtic history created opportunities for scholarly research and cultural preservation, ensuring continued study and appreciation of this crucial period in British history. The story of Hen Ogledd ultimately represents one of most significant yet underappreciated chapters in formation of medieval Britain, demonstrating sophisticated political, cultural, and economic achievements of post-Roman Celtic society, while revealing complex processes of cultural adaptation and survival shaping development of modern British identity. The northern British kingdoms created lasting legacies in literature, law, religion, and political organisation, continuing to influence British and European development long after their political independence ended. From the poetry of Taliesin celebrating Urien's victories to the tragic heroism of Gododdin, from the sophisticated diplomacy of Strathclyde's survival to the cultural synthesis preserving Celtic identity under foreign rule, these kingdoms demonstrated that civilization didn't collapse when Rome fell. It transformed, adapted, and endured. Think about what we've discovered. For 2 centuries after Rome's withdrawal, British kingdoms in the north maintained sophisticated political organizations, professional militaries, literate courts, and cultural achievements rivaling anything in post-Roman Europe. They weren't primitive tribes retreating into darkness. They were complex states, navigating the challenges of their age with remarkable skill. Urien of Rheged coordinated multi-kingdom coalitions and won decisive victories against Anglo-Saxon expansion. The warriors who rode to Catreath weren't doomed barbarians. They were highly trained professional soldiers undertaking carefully planned military operation that failed through tactical misfortune, not cultural inadequacy. Strathclyde's survival for over 400 years after Catreath demonstrates extraordinary political flexibility and cultural resilience. Even under Viking siege, diplomatic accommodation with Norse settlers, and eventual absorption into Scotland, the kingdom preserved essential elements of British identity while adapting to changing circumstances. The cultural memory preserved in Welsh literature ensured that achievements of Hen Ogledd would inspire Celtic peoples for centuries. The poetry of Taliesin and Aneurin ranks among finest literary achievements of early medieval Europe. The archaeological evidence confirms what the poetry suggests. These were sophisticated societies with advanced metallurgy, impressive fortifications, extensive trade networks, and complex political organizations. The hill forts dotting the landscape weren't crude refuges but engineered defensive systems incorporating Roman techniques with Celtic innovation. The royal halls weren't primitive longhouses but carefully designed ceremonial and administrative centers capable of supporting substantial courts. The warriors weren't savage raiders but professional soldiers equipped with pattern-welded swords, sophisticated armor, and tactical training enabling them to defeat Anglo-Saxon forces for generations. Modern Britain owes more to Hen Ogledd than most people realize. The territorial boundaries they established still influence modern political geography. The cultural traditions they preserved fed into development of Scottish, Welsh, and Northern English regional identities. The synthesis of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon cultures in borderlands created distinctive characteristics defining these regions today. Place names throughout southern Scotland and northern England preserve linguistic traces of Brittonic-speaking populations. Saints venerated in northern churches often trace origins to British Christian communities of Hen Ogledd. Perhaps most importantly, the story of the Old North reminds us that history isn't simple narrative of progress or decline. It's complex tapestry of adaptation, survival, and transformation. The northern British kingdoms didn't simply disappear, they evolved, and their political structures adapted, their cultural traditions transformed, their people integrated into new political frameworks while preserving essential elements of their identity. This wasn't failure, it was the resilience of culture proving stronger than military defeat. If you enjoyed this journey through Britain's forgotten kingdoms, the warrior culture that terrified Anglo-Saxons, the poetry that preserved heroic memory for 1,000 years, the fortresses that defied Roman legions and Viking fleets, the sophisticated political systems that governed northern Britain for 4 centuries, subscribe to Flow of History for more deep dives into the past that shaped our present. Because history isn't just about dates and battles, it's about people who built civilizations in the ruins of empires, who preserved their culture against overwhelming odds, who transformed defeat into literary masterpieces, and who shaped the world we inherited. The Old North may have fallen politically, but its legacy endures in every stone fortress, every carved monument, every line of ancient poetry, and every place name preserving the language of people who refused to be forgotten.